Welcome back, everybody. Joining us from Washington with a look at Axios AM, editor-in-chief for Axios, Nicholas Johnson. Nicholas, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Talk to us about Axios. Is one big thing today.
Yeah, our one big thing today is looking at a collection of data points to try and put this year's midterms in the context of other big wave elections where the minority party swept into power in the House. And our conclusion is that it's looking good for Democrats. Looking at a handful of these numbers, particularly presidential approval rating, congressional approval rating, and the breakdown of approval ratings between each of the parties. It matches up very well for Democrats with other elections when the minority party swept into control in the House, particularly 2006 and 2010 when Republicans and Democrats and Republicans respectively conquered the House. This is another data point for us showing that November is looking pretty good for House Democrats.
So to that point, how are you guys able to explain that? Or is there any data points that explain why this trend? Is it because the Democrats have a clear political vision that people are rallying about, getting excited about? Or is this kind of a problem with the Republican platform from the president on down that's alienating people and triggering this potential blue wave?
Yeah, the big numbers that match up to prior wave elections are both people not happy with the president, people not happy with the party in power, and people not happy with the direction of the country. This is very much an election, I think, that'll hinge upon President Trump. A lot of his backers, of course, will come out and support Republican candidates. We've got polling that shows when he endorses a candidate, they do a little bit better in subsequent races. And so it'll very much be Democrats running against Republicans and certainly against President Trump if they're going to win the House and the Senate.
Are we still very much seeing this as local races?
That's very much dependent on the candidate.
Yeah.
But what I think both sides are trying to do, if they don't have a strong local candidate, is to nationalize the election. Democrats very much want to run against Trump when places where he's unpopular. And then, of course, those states, those red states where there are blue senators in particular, that's where Republicans definitely want to make Trump the issue because he has more support there.
Let's talk about what is different about the political climate in this country this year compared to where it has been in previous years.
Right. There's one outlier in this chart, and that is voter enthusiasm. Democrats certainly come across as more enthusiastic about voting in this year's midterms than Republicans, but compared to some of the big sweeping wave elections earlier this century, it's not quite as high. So that's a little bit of a red flag for Democrats. They have to get their people out to vote if they're going to get this win.
Yeah, we're a few months away, but obviously a lot of tension already building up around these midterms. Nicholas Johnson, thank you very much. Of course, we're going to be reading Axios AM in just a bit. And you, too, can sign up for the newsletter by going to signup.axios.com.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.